In 1969, a cargo ship vanished in the Bermuda Triangle. 52 years later, a deep-sea camera captured something floating past the wreckage, something that moved, something that looked back at the lens. The footage was classified within 48 hours. Tonight, you will learn why. What you are about to hear has never been compiled in a single place before. 7 cases, 7 impossible events, 7 questions that science, governments, and the most brilliant investigators on Earth have failed to answer. These are not ghost stories whispered around campfires. These are documented incidents, verified by radar systems, witnessed by hundreds, and in some cases, captured on film that authorities worked desperately to suppress. I have spent the last 18 months digging through declassified archives, interviewing retired intelligence officers, and tracking down witnesses who have never spoken publicly until now. Some of what I uncovered made me question my understanding of reality. Other revelations kept me awake for nights, staring at my bedroom door, wondering if something was staring back from the darkness beyond. Before we begin, I need you to understand something. These 7 mysteries share a disturbing connection. It took me months to see it, but once you notice the pattern, you cannot unsee it. Pay attention to the dates. Pay attention to the locations. By the end of this video, you will understand what links them together, and that connection might be the most terrifying part of all. Let us start with a name you have probably never heard: Eleanor Marsh. She was a radio operator stationed at a remote listening post in northern Alaska during the winter of 1952. For 3 months, Eleanor worked alone in a concrete bunker buried beneath the permafrost, monitoring Soviet transmissions across the Arctic. The isolation was crushing. The darkness was absolute. The temperature outside her bunker regularly dropped to 60 degrees below zero. But Eleanor was not alone out there. Something was broadcasting to her, and what it said changed her forever. The official records state that Eleanor suffered a psychological breakdown and was medically discharged, but the actual transcripts from her listening post tell a different story. On November 14, 1952, Eleanor intercepted a transmission that did not match any known Soviet frequency. The signal was coming from beneath the ice, approximately 2 miles from her position. That should have been impossible. There was nothing beneath that ice except frozen earth and ancient permafrost that had not thawed in 10,000 years. Eleanor followed protocol. She documented the signal, recorded its frequency, and attempted to decode it. What she discovered made her hands tremble so violently that her handwriting became nearly illegible. The transmission was in Morse code, but it was not Russian. It was not any military communication she had ever encountered. The message repeated on a 12-minute loop, and when Eleanor translated it, she found herself reading her own obituary. The transmission contained her full name, her date of birth, her hometown, and the names of her parents. It described the circumstances of her death in precise detail. According to the signal coming from beneath the ice, Eleanor Marsh would die on February 3, 1953, at exactly 3:47 in the morning. She would be found frozen in her bunk with her eyes open and her mouth twisted into what the transmission described as an expression of profound recognition. Eleanor reported this to her superiors. They dismissed it as a Soviet psychological operation, a clumsy attempt to destabilize American personnel through personalized terror. They ordered her to continue her duties and ignore the transmissions. But Eleanor could not ignore them, because the signal changed. Every night at midnight, a new message would emerge from beneath the ice. And every night, the message contained information that only Eleanor could know. It described her childhood bedroom. It quoted conversations she had with her mother that no one else had ever heard. It detailed a secret she had never told another living soul, something that happened to her when she was 7 years old, something she had buried so deep that she barely remembered it herself. Whatever was beneath that ice knew her better than she knew herself, and it was counting down the days until February 3rd. Eleanor made a decision that violated every protocol in her training manual. On December 28th, she left the bunker. She took a flashlight, a pickaxe, and a portable radio receiver, and she walked 2 miles across the frozen wasteland toward the source of the signal. The temperature was 53 degrees below zero. At that temperature, exposed skin freezes in under 2 minutes. Breathing becomes painful as ice crystals form in your lungs. But Eleanor kept walking. She had to know what was down there. She had to understand how it knew her secrets. When the search team found her 3 days later, she was standing in the center of a perfectly circular hole in the ice. The hole was approximately 15 feet in diameter, and it descended straight down into absolute darkness. Eleanor was alive, but she was not responsive. She stood there motionless, staring down into that black void. Her lips were moving, but no sound came out. The search team had to physically carry her back to the bunker. She did not resist. She did not acknowledge their presence. She simply kept staring behind her, toward the hole, as if something down there was watching her leave. Eleanor Marsh was evacuated to a military hospital in Anchorage. The official records state that she recovered from severe hypothermia and psychological trauma and was discharged 6 months later. But a nurse who worked in that hospital told a different story before her own death in 2019. According to this nurse, Eleanor never spoke during her entire hospitalization. She communicated exclusively through written notes, and she refused to write anything after sunset. During the day, she would fill notebook after notebook with dense, cramped handwriting. The staff assumed she was journaling, processing her trauma through written expression. But when a curious orderly finally read one of Eleanor's notebooks, he discovered something that made him request an immediate transfer to a different facility. Every notebook contained the same thing: names. Thousands of names written over and over, filling every page from edge to edge, and next to each name was a date. The orderly recognized some of the names. They belonged to other patients in the hospital. They belonged to nurses and doctors on staff. They belonged to his own family members, people Eleanor had never met and could not possibly know existed. Next to each name was a date in the future. Some dates were months away. Others were decades away. The orderly found his own name on page 347 of the third notebook. The date written next to it was June 19, 1987. On June 19, 1987, that orderly died in a car accident on a rain-slicked highway outside Fairbanks. He was the only fatality. The investigating officer noted that there was no mechanical failure, no evidence of another vehicle, and no explanation for why an experienced driver would suddenly veer off the road into a concrete barrier at 70 miles per hour. But witnesses reported something strange. In the seconds before the crash, they saw the orderly's face illuminated by his headlights reflected in the rearview mirror. He was smiling, and his lips were moving, as if he was speaking to someone in the back seat, someone the witnesses could not see. Eleanor Marsh disappeared from all official records in 1954. No death certificate, no discharge paperwork, no forwarding address. She simply ceased to exist in any government database, but the hole she found in the Alaskan ice remained. In 1967, a geological survey team was sent to investigate the site. They found the hole had widened to approximately 40 feet in diameter. It still descended into perfect darkness. When they lowered a camera on a 300-foot cable, the feed showed nothing but black. No ice, no rock, no bottom, just darkness that seemed to move, to breathe, to pulse with something that the lead geologist later described as awareness. The survey was abandoned. The site was classified. And every 15 years since 1967, someone from a small village 60 miles away walks out onto the ice, finds that hole, and disappears into it. They are always found 3 days later, standing at the edge, staring down, their lips moving silently. None of them remember walking there. None of them can explain what they saw, and every single one of them dies exactly when Eleanor's notebooks predicted they would. This brings me to the second mystery, and this one involves a ship that should not exist. On March 4, 1947, the SS Ourang Medan sent a distress signal that was picked up by multiple vessels in the Strait of Malacca. The message was garbled, interrupted by bursts of static that some operators described as sounding almost like laughter. But the words that came through clearly were enough to send a chill down the spine of every sailor who heard them. All officers, including captain, are dead, lying in chartroom and bridge, possibly whole crew dead. The transmission paused for nearly a full minute. Then a new voice came through, different from the first, speaking in a flat monotone that one radio operator later described as sounding like someone reading words they did not understand. "I die." The transmission ended. The American merchant ship Silver Star was closest to the Ourang Medan's reported position. They altered course immediately, pushing through unusually still waters toward the coordinates provided in the distress call. The captain of the Silver Star, a veteran of 30 years at sea, later testified that the ocean that day felt wrong. The waves were too gentle. The air was too still. The sky had taken on a yellowish tint that he had never seen before in all his decades of sailing. It was, he said, as if the sea itself was holding its breath, waiting for something terrible to happen. They found the Ourang Medan drifting approximately 6 hours after receiving the distress signal. The ship was intact, no visible damage, no signs of fire or combat. It simply floated there motionless as if it had been placed on the water by some enormous hand. The Silver Star's crew called out. No response. They sounded their horn. Silence. The captain ordered a boarding party to investigate. What they found on that ship has never been fully explained, and the photographs they took, the ones that were supposed to be destroyed, have recently resurfaced. I obtained copies from an estate sale in Singapore. The family selling them did not know what they had, but I recognized the ship's name stenciled on a lifeboat in the background, and what I saw in those photographs kept me awake for a week. Every single crew member of the Ourang Medan was dead, but they had not simply died. They had been arranged. 47 bodies positioned throughout the ship in a precise geometric pattern that, when viewed from above, formed a symbol. The boarding party did not recognize the symbol. Neither did naval intelligence when the photographs reached them, but I recognized it because I had seen it before. I had seen it in Eleanor Marsh's notebooks, drawn in the margins between the names and the dates. A circle with 7 points, each point connected to the center by a line that curved in a way that hurt to look at, a way that seemed to move when you were not looking directly at it. The dead crew of the Ourang Medan had expressions on their faces, every single one of them, eyes wide open, mouths stretched into shapes that were not quite smiles and not quite screams, arms extended toward something above them, something they had seen in their final moments, something that terrified them so completely that their bodies had locked into position as they died. The ship's dog was dead too, found on the bridge, its teeth bared at an empty corner of the room. Even the ship's cat, discovered in the engine room, had died with its back arched and its eyes fixed on the ceiling, as if something had descended from above and taken them all. The boarding party spent 23 minutes on the Ourang Medan. They documented what they could. They searched for survivors. They found none. They also found no cause of death, no wounds, no signs of poison, no evidence of disease. The crew of the Ourang Medan had simply stopped living, all at the same time, while looking up at something none of them could escape. But here is where the story takes its darkest turn. As the boarding party prepared to attach a tow line and bring the Ourang Medan back to port, something happened in the cargo hold. Something that would ensure no investigator would ever examine that ship, no scientist would ever study those bodies, and no one would ever know for certain what killed those 47 men in the middle of the Strait of Malacca. Smoke began pouring from the lower decks. Not ordinary smoke. The captain of the Silver Star, watching from his bridge, described it as having a color he had never seen before, a shade somewhere between purple and black that seemed to drink in the light around it. The smoke rose straight up into the windless sky, forming a column that stretched hundreds of feet into the air before dispersing into that sickly yellow haze. The boarding party barely made it back to the Silver Star before the Ourang Medan exploded. The explosion should not have been possible. Maritime investigators later determined that the Ourang Medan was not carrying any explosive cargo. Its fuel reserves were too low to produce a blast of that magnitude. And yet the ship detonated with such force that debris rained down on the Silver Star nearly a quarter-mile away. Witnesses described the sound not as a single explosion but as a series of detonations, almost rhythmic, almost like a heartbeat accelerating until it simply stopped. Within 4 minutes, the Ourang Medan had sunk beneath the waves, taking its 47 dead crew members, its impossible geometric pattern, and its secrets down into the darkness of the Strait of Malacca. The Silver Star's captain filed an extensive report. He included testimony from every member of the boarding party. He described the positions of the bodies, the expressions on their faces, the strange symbol they formed when viewed as a whole. He mentioned the purple-black smoke and the impossible explosion. He submitted everything to the appropriate authorities and waited for an investigation that never came. 3 weeks later, every copy of his report vanished from naval archives. The boarding party members were reassigned to different vessels, scattered across the Pacific in what one of them later called a deliberate effort to ensure we never spoke to each other again. The captain himself was offered early retirement with full benefits, contingent on his signing a document that prohibited him from ever discussing the Ourang Medan publicly. He signed. He had a family to protect. But before he died in 1982, he told his grandson everything. That grandson sold me the photographs last year, along with a handwritten account of his grandfather's final testimony. The official explanation, the one you will find if you search for the Ourang Medan today, is that the ship was carrying improperly secured chemical cargo that produced toxic gases, killed the crew, and eventually ignited. This explanation accounts for nothing. It does not explain how 47 men positioned themselves into a geometric pattern while dying from gas exposure. It does not explain why the ship's animals died with expressions of terror directed at the ceiling. It does not explain the symbol in Eleanor Marsh's notebooks, drawn 15 years before the Ourang Medan set sail, matching exactly the pattern formed by 47 corpses in the Strait of Malacca. But someone knew. Someone understood the connection, and that someone worked for an agency that did not officially exist until 1947, the same year the Ourang Medan sank. I am talking about the Central Intelligence Agency. Their involvement in this story is documented, verified, and deeply disturbing, because the CIA did not investigate the Ourang Medan to solve the mystery. They investigated it to ensure the mystery would never be solved. This brings me to the third case, and this one hits closer to home than you might expect. In the summer of 1978, a family of 4 moved into a farmhouse in rural Wisconsin. The Hendricks family, father, mother, 2 children, ages 9 and 12. They were escaping the noise and expense of Chicago, seeking a simpler life in the countryside. The farmhouse had been vacant for 7 years. The price was suspiciously low. The real estate agent seemed almost desperate to close the sale. None of these warning signs registered with the Hendricks family. They were too excited about their new beginning to notice that something was terribly wrong. The first strange occurrence happened on their 3rd night in the house. The mother, Patricia Hendricks, woke at exactly 3:47 in the morning to the sound of footsteps above her bedroom. This should have been impossible. There was no second floor. The farmhouse was a single-story structure with an attic that had been sealed shut decades earlier. Patricia lay in bed, listening to those footsteps pace back and forth across a floor that did not exist. They continued for exactly 12 minutes, then stopped abruptly, replaced by a silence so complete that Patricia could hear her own heartbeat pounding in her ears. She told her husband the next morning. He dismissed it as the old house settling, the kind of creaks and groans that come with any structure built in the previous century. But that night he heard them too, footsteps, directly above their bed, packing in a pattern that seemed almost purposeful, almost as if someone was measuring the dimensions of a room. He checked the attic access the next day. It was nailed shut with boards that had not been disturbed in decades. The nails were rusted in place. Cobwebs filled every gap. Nothing had been up there in years. The children began having nightmares, not ordinary childhood fears of monsters under beds or shadows in closets. These were specific nightmares, detailed and consistent, shared between the two siblings despite sleeping in separate rooms. They both dreamed of a woman standing in the corner of their bedrooms. She wore a dress that they described as looking like old photographs, the kind their grandmother kept in albums from before the war. Her face was always in shadow, but her hands were visible. And her hands were always moving, always beckoning, always gesturing for the children to come closer. The 9-year-old Michael began sleepwalking. His parents would find him standing in the kitchen at 3 in the morning, staring at the wall beside the refrigerator. When they asked him what he was doing, he would not respond. His eyes were open, but they were not seeing his parents. They were seeing something else, something on the other side of that wall, something that, according to Michael, wanted to show him what was buried underneath the house. Patricia Hendricks started keeping a journal. She documented every strange occurrence, every nightmare, every instance of sleepwalking. She noted the time of each event. She realized with growing horror that everything happened at or around 3:47 in the morning. The footsteps, the nightmares, Michael's sleepwalking episodes. They were all synchronized to that specific moment, as if something in or beneath that house operated on a schedule that had nothing to do with the living family sharing its space. After 6 weeks, Patricia had filled 3 journals. She also noticed something that made her blood run cold. The entries were becoming longer, not because more things were happening, but because the things that were happening were lasting longer. The footsteps that once continued for 12 minutes now went on for 30. Michael's sleepwalking episodes, which initially lasted only a few minutes, now stretched to nearly an hour. Whatever was in that house was growing stronger. Whatever wanted her children was becoming more confident, and it was no longer content to simply watch. On August 14, 1978, Patricia woke to find her husband's side of the bed empty. The clock read 3:47. She called his name, no response. She got up to search for him, checking the bathroom, the kitchen, the living room. Empty, all empty. Then she heard something that stopped her in her tracks. Her husband's voice coming from the sealed attic. He was speaking to someone, and whoever he was speaking to was answering in a language Patricia had never heard before. Patricia climbed onto a chair and pressed her ear against the ceiling. The voices were clearer now. Her husband was repeating something, the same phrase over and over, in a tone that sounded nothing like him. It was flat, emotionless, mechanical, and the voice answering him was worse. It was layered, as if multiple people were speaking the same words at the same time but slightly out of sync, creating a chorus of whispers that merged into something almost comprehensible but deeply wrong. She ran to the garage and grabbed a crowbar. She did not think about what she was doing. She did not consider the consequences. She only knew that her husband was in a place he could not have reached, speaking to something that should not exist, and she had to get him out. Patricia attacked the attic access with a fury she did not know she possessed. The boards splintered. The rusted nails screamed as they pulled free. And when she finally created an opening large enough to see through, she found herself looking into absolute darkness. Not the ordinary darkness of an unlit space. This was something thicker, something that seemed to push back against the light from her flashlight, something that had weight and presence and intention. Patricia called her husband's name. The voices stopped. The silence that followed was so complete that she could hear dust settling on the floor below her. Then, from somewhere in that impossible darkness, her husband answered. He said her name, just once, but his voice came from directly behind her. Patricia spun around. Her husband was standing in the hallway, still wearing his pajamas, staring at her with an expression she had never seen on his face before. His eyes were wrong. Not the wrong color, not glowing or changed in any obvious way, just wrong. Empty in a way that living eyes should never be empty. He asked her what she was doing. She asked him how he got down from the attic. He told her he had been in bed the whole time. He told her she must have been dreaming. But Patricia was holding a crowbar. The attic access was torn open above her. And when she looked at her husband's feet, she saw that they were covered in dust. The same dust that had been undisturbed in that sealed attic for decades. The same dust that was now tracked across their hallway in footprints that led from the attic access to where her husband stood. The Hendricks family left that house the next morning. They did not pack their belongings. They did not contact the real estate agent. They simply got in their car and drove until they reached Patricia's sister's house in Minnesota, 300 miles away. They never returned to Wisconsin. They never explained to anyone what had happened. And for 30 years, they tried to pretend that the farmhouse and its impossible attic had never existed. But in 2008, Patricia's husband died. And in his final hours, delirious with fever in a hospital bed, he told the attending nurse something that made her immediately request a psychiatric evaluation for herself. He told her that he had never left that attic. He told her that the thing that walked out of the farmhouse with his wife and children was not him. It had been wearing his face for 30 years, learning how to be human, waiting for the right moment to return home. And home was not Wisconsin. Home was somewhere much darker, much older, and much closer than anyone suspected. The nurse dismissed this as the ravings of a dying man, but when she researched the Hendricks family after his death, she discovered something that changed her mind. Both of the Hendricks children, now adults in their 40s, had died on the same day. Different locations, different causes, no connection except for one detail that should have been impossible. They both died at exactly 3:47 in the morning. And they were both found standing up, their eyes open, their mouths moving as if speaking to someone no one else could see. The fourth mystery takes us to a place that exists on no map, a place that should not be possible according to every principle of geography and physics, a place that multiple witnesses have described in identical detail despite never meeting each other and living decades apart. In 1934, a British explorer named Arthur Whitmore was trekking through the Himalayas when he became separated from his expedition during a sudden storm. For 3 days, he wandered through blinding snow and howling wind, certain that he would die in those frozen mountains. On the 4th day, the storm cleared, and Arthur found himself standing at the edge of a valley that he knew with absolute certainty should not exist. The valley was green, impossibly, absurdly green, as if someone had transplanted a piece of English countryside into the middle of the Himalayas. Flowers bloomed along its slopes. A river wound through its center, reflecting a sky that seemed somehow brighter than the sky above the surrounding peaks. Arthur descended into the valley, convinced he was hallucinating, certain that his frozen brain was constructing a comforting illusion to ease his passage into death. But the valley was real. The grass beneath his feet was real. The warmth that surrounded him, replacing the deadly cold of the mountains, was real. And the village he discovered at the valley's center was real too, except the people who lived there were not quite right. They welcomed Arthur. They gave him food and water and a warm place to sleep. They spoke English with an accent he could not place, using words and phrases that seemed slightly outdated, as if they had learned the language from a textbook published 50 years earlier. They told him he was the first visitor in a very long time. They told him he was welcome to stay as long as he wished. They told him that no one who entered the valley ever truly wanted to leave. Arthur stayed for what he believed was 3 days. He explored the village, speaking with its inhabitants, documenting everything in his journal. The people were friendly but evasive. They answered his questions about their history with vague references to a time before, a period they described as the long darkness when the valley was sealed away from the outside world. When Arthur asked what had sealed it, they simply smiled and changed the subject. On his 4th morning in the valley, Arthur woke to find his journal missing. He searched his room, the village, the surrounding fields. Nothing. The journal was gone. And when he asked the villagers if they had seen it, they looked at him with expressions of polite confusion. "What journal?" they asked. "You arrived with nothing. You have always been here. You have never left." Arthur felt the first stirrings of genuine fear. He tried to leave the valley, hiking toward the mountain pass where he had entered. But no matter which direction he walked, no matter how long he traveled, he always found himself returning to the village. The paths curved in ways that defied logic. The sun moved across the sky in patterns that contradicted everything he knew about celestial navigation. And the villagers watched him, always smiling, always welcoming, always suggesting that he should rest, that he should eat, that he should stop trying to leave a place that was so clearly better than the world he had left behind. Arthur Whitmore escaped the valley on his 17th day. He never documented how. His journal, when he finally returned to England, contained no entries between his arrival in the valley and his sudden reappearance at his expedition's base camp. The pages covering that period had been torn out. Arthur claimed to have no memory of removing them. He also claimed to have no memory of the 17 days he spent in that impossible green place, but he remembered the villagers. He remembered their smiles, and he remembered, with a certainty that haunted him until his death in 1962, that they were not alive, not in any way that the word alive could be meaningfully applied. Here is where Arthur Whitmore's story connects to the others. In 1987, a mountaineering team from Japan discovered a valley in the Himalayas matching Arthur's description exactly. Green slopes, flowing river, flowers blooming in impossible abundance. They photographed everything. They documented the village, the buildings, the strange geometry of its streets that seemed designed for inhabitants who did not move the way humans move. But when they developed their photographs back in Tokyo, every single image showed the same thing. An empty valley, bare rock, no vegetation, no river, no village, just gray stone and snow, as if the life they had witnessed was visible only to the naked eye, only in person, only when the valley wanted to be seen. 3 members of that mountaineering team returned to the Himalayas the following year. They were searching for the valley. They wanted to understand what they had seen. They never came back. Their bodies were discovered 4 months later by a rescue expedition. They were found sitting in a circle in a shallow cave, their hands joined, their eyes open, their faces frozen into expressions of absolute peace. The rescue team leader noted something in his report that was later redacted from all official documents. The 3 climbers were not dressed for the mountains. They were wearing light cotton clothing, the kind you might wear on a warm summer day. And their skin, despite having been exposed to sub-zero temperatures for months, showed no signs of frostbite. It was warm to the touch, as if they had only just stopped breathing. The 5th mystery requires me to take you somewhere even more disturbing. I need to tell you about room 428. The Carlisle Hotel opened in New York City in 1891. It was considered one of the finest establishments in Manhattan, attracting wealthy guests from around the world. But from the moment it opened, there were problems with room 428. Guests who stayed in that room reported nightmares so vivid that they woke screaming. Maids refused to clean it alone, claiming they could hear breathing from the walls when they entered. The hotel manager received so many complaints about room 428 that he eventually stopped renting it entirely. For 3 decades, it sat empty, locked, gathering dust while the rest of the hotel thrived. In 1923, a journalist named Thomas Crane convinced the manager to let him spend a night in room 428. He was writing an article about supposedly haunted locations in New York, and he believed a night in the infamous room would provide excellent material. The manager reluctantly agreed, on the condition that Thomas sign a waiver releasing the hotel from any responsibility for his well-being. Thomas signed. He thought it was a theatrical precaution, part of the mythology the hotel had constructed around the room. He was wrong. Thomas Crane entered room 428 at 9 in the evening on October 15, 1923. He brought a notebook, a camera, and a flashlight. He intended to document everything, to expose the room's reputation as superstitious nonsense perpetuated by imaginative guests and credulous staff. He was a rational man, a skeptic, someone who believed in evidence and logic above all else. By midnight, Thomas Crane had stopped believing in anything at all. The first entry in his notebook, timestamped at 9:47 p.m., described the room in ordinary terms: modest furnishings, faded wallpaper, a window overlooking the street. Nothing unusual, nothing frightening. But the entries grew increasingly disturbed as the night progressed. At 10:30 p.m., Thomas noted that the temperature in the room had dropped significantly, despite the radiator functioning normally. At 11:15 p.m., he wrote that he could hear someone packing in the hallway outside his door, but when he looked through the peephole, the hallway was empty. At 11:52 p.m., his handwriting became shaky, almost illegible. He wrote that the wallpaper was moving, not falling or peeling, moving, breathing, expanding and contracting in rhythm with something he could feel but not see. The final entry was timestamped at 3:47 a.m. It contained only 2 words, repeated over and over until they filled the remaining pages of the notebook. It sees, it sees, it sees. The phrase covered every margin, every blank space, written in handwriting that grew larger and more frantic until the final pages were nearly illegible. The pen pressed so hard into the paper that it tore through in several places. Thomas Crane was found the next morning by the hotel manager. He was alive, technically. His heart was beating. His lungs were breathing. But Thomas Crane, the skeptical journalist who had entered room 428 believing in nothing, had become something else entirely. He never spoke another coherent word. He spent the remaining 41 years of his life in a psychiatric facility, staring at walls, occasionally moving his hand as if writing invisible words on invisible paper. The nurses learned to avoid his room at night, because at 3:47 every morning, Thomas would begin laughing. A quiet, breathless laugh that went on for exactly 12 minutes before stopping as abruptly as it had begun. And here is the detail that connects Thomas Crane to everything else. The psychiatric facility where he spent his final decades was built on the same site where, in 1967, researchers would discover the first documented case of a phenomenon they could not explain. That phenomenon was called residual cognitive imprinting, a clinical term for something that defied clinical explanation. Patients in the facility, patients who had never met Thomas Crane, who had been admitted years after his death, began writing the same 2 words in their sleep. It sees. Always in the same handwriting. Always at 3:47 in the morning. Always for exactly 12 minutes. The researchers tested 17 patients over a period of 3 years. None of them had any knowledge of Thomas Crane or room 428. None of them had any connection to each other. And yet they all produced identical handwriting samples, matching Thomas Crane's final notebook entry stroke for stroke, letter for letter, as if something was using their sleeping hands to deliver a message that Thomas had started writing 40 years earlier. The 6th mystery brings us to the ocean, to a depth where sunlight has never reached and human beings were never meant to go. In 1991, a deep-sea research vessel operated by a private oceanographic institute was conducting a routine survey of the Mariana Trench. The vessel, named the Nereid, was equipped with the most advanced sonar and imaging technology available at the time. Its mission was simple: map the trench floor, document geological formations, collect water samples. There was nothing unusual about the expedition, nothing unusual about the crew, nothing unusual about anything, until they reached a depth of 36,000 feet, and the sonar detected something that should not have been there. The object was massive. The sonar return suggested a structure approximately 600 feet long, 200 feet wide, and perfectly symmetrical. It was resting on the trench floor at a depth that would crush any known submarine. The research team initially assumed it was a geological formation, an unusual rock feature shaped by millions of years of pressure and current. But geological formations are not symmetrical. Geological formations do not have right angles. And geological formations do not move. The Nereid's camera array captured 14 minutes of footage before the equipment failed. Those 14 minutes have never been officially released. but a technician who worked on the vessel copied the footage onto a personal device before the original was confiscated by representatives from an agency he described only as governmental. That technician shared the footage with a marine biologist friend, who shared it with a colleague, who eventually shared it with me under conditions of strict anonymity. I have watched those 14 minutes more times than I care to admit. What they show is something resting on the ocean floor that is clearly not natural. The structure has surfaces that appear smooth, almost polished, reflecting the camera's lights in ways that suggest a metallic or crystalline composition. Its shape is difficult to describe because it seems to change depending on the angle of observation, as if it exists in more dimensions than three, and the camera is only capturing a cross-section of something much larger and much more complex. At the 7-minute mark, the structure moves, not dramatically, not suddenly. It shifts almost imperceptibly like a sleeping animal adjusting its position. The movement is so subtle that you might miss it on first viewing, but watch it again and you will see the shadows change. Watch it a third time and you will notice the sediment on the trench floor rippling outward from the structure in concentric circles, as if displaced by something breathing. At the 11-minute mark, something emerges from the structure. I have watched this portion frame by frame, slowing it down, enhancing it, analyzing it with every tool available to me. What emerges is not mechanical. It is not biological, at least not in any biological framework we currently understand. It is a shape that moves with purpose, with awareness, with what I can only describe as curiosity. It approaches the camera slowly, deliberately, as if studying the lens with the same intensity that the lens is studying it. At the 13-minute mark, it reaches toward the camera, and at 13 minutes and 47 seconds, the footage ends. The time stamp on that final frame reads 3:47. The Nereid surfaced 12 hours later. The crew refused to discuss what had happened at depth. The captain filed a report that consisted of a single sentence: survey incomplete due to equipment malfunction. The Oceanographic Institute that funded the expedition closed its doors 3 months later. Its records were purchased by a foundation with no public board of directors, no listed address, and no apparent purpose beyond acquiring and sealing information that certain parties wanted buried. The seventh and final mystery is the one that ties everything together. It is also the one that frightens me the most because it is not finished. It is happening right now, and after tonight, you will not be able to pretend you do not know about it. In 2019, a data analyst working for a large technology company noticed an anomaly in global internet traffic patterns. Every night, at exactly 3:47 a.m. Greenwich Mean Time, there was a spike in data transmission from a source that could not be identified. The spike lasted exactly 12 minutes. The data packets contained information that did not conform to any known protocol. They were not emails, not web traffic, not streaming media, not any form of communication that the analyst or her colleagues could categorize. The packets were being sent to every connected device on Earth simultaneously. Every computer, every phone, every tablet, every smart device in every home in every country. And no one noticed because the packets arrived during the deepest phase of human sleep, embedding themselves in system logs that would be automatically overwritten before morning. The analyst spent 3 months capturing and studying these packets. She developed custom software to decode them, and when she finally broke through the encryption, what she found was a list of names, billions of names updated nightly, each one accompanied by a date. Some dates had already passed. She cross-referenced those names with public records and discovered that every single person whose date had passed was dead. They had died on the exact date listed next to their name. Different causes, different locations, different circumstances, but the date was always correct, always precise, always inevitable. She found her own name on the list. She found her family's names. She found the names of every person she had ever known, and next to each name was a date that had not yet arrived. She told me she considered going to the authorities. She considered going to the press. But then she noticed something in the data that stopped her cold. The list was not just a prediction, it was a schedule. And the source of the transmission, when she finally traced it through 17 layers of routing and redirection, originated from a set of coordinates she recognized. The coordinates pointed to a location in northern Alaska, a location where, in 1952, a radio operator named Eleanor Marsh had discovered a hole in the ice that descended into darkness without end. Everything connects. Eleanor's notebooks predicting deaths decades in advance. The Ourang Medan's crew arranged into a seven-pointed symbol. The Hendricks farmhouse and the entity that wore a dead man's face. The impossible valley that exists only when it chooses to be seen. Room 428 and the message that passed from one sleeping mind to another across generations. The structure at the bottom of the Mariana Trench that breathes and watches and waits. And now, a nightly transmission beaming a schedule of human mortality to every device on the planet, originating from a hole in the ice that has been growing wider for 70 years. 7 mysteries. 7 points on a symbol that 47 dead men formed with their bodies in the Strait of Malacca. 7 events spanning nearly a century, all connected by the same timestamp, the same 12-minute window, the same darkness that watches from places we cannot reach and should not try to find. I do not know what is in that hole in Alaska. I do not know what killed the crew of the Ourang Medan. I do not know what lives at the bottom of the Mariana Trench or what hides in a valley that exists only when it wants to. But I know that the list is real. I know the dates are accurate. And I know that somewhere in a stream of data that washes over your devices every night while you sleep, your name is written next to a date you will never see coming. The analyst who discovered the transmission disappeared in November of 2019. Her apartment was found empty. Her computers were wiped clean. The only thing left behind was a sticky note on her refrigerator, written in handwriting that her family confirmed was not hers. 2 words, "It sees." I started this video by telling you that these 7 mysteries share a connection. Now you understand what that connection is. Something has been watching us for a very long time. Something that knows our names. Something that knows when we will die. Something that operates on a schedule measured in 12-minute intervals at 3:47 in the morning. And something that has been trying, through dead radio operators and drifting ships and sealed attic rooms and impossible valleys, and haunted hotel rooms and structures at the bottom of the ocean and nightly data transmissions, to tell us that it sees us. All of us. Always. I do not know what to do with this information. I only know that I had to share it, because the alternative was sitting alone with the knowledge that something beneath the ice has been counting down to a date written next to my name, next to your name, next to every name that has ever existed or ever will. If this kept you awake, if you felt that chill at the back of your neck, if you glanced at your phone and wondered what arrived while you were sleeping, then subscribe to this channel, because I am not done investigating. There are more connections to uncover, more documents to find, more witnesses to interview, and the deeper I dig, the closer I get to answering the only question that truly matters. What is in the hole?